Canada curious? This is the Yes We Canada podcast, the progressive's guide to getting the fuck out.
Hey, I'm Matt Zimble in Montreal. Okay, full disclosure, for the second time in 56 episodes, we have a guest. Now, I've never met today's guest, though she's been my trusted companion while I made dinner Monday through Friday for 16 years. Journalist, author, former host of CBC's 55-year-old current affairs program, As It Happens, Carol Off joins us today.
Hello, I'm Carol Off.
Now, after 16 years on As It Happens, Carol left the show in 2022, and in the fall of 2024, she released her fifth book, At a Loss for Words, Conversations in an Age of Rage. There are 6 chapters, each one with a one-word title: Freedom, Democracy, Woke, Choice, Taxes, Truth. Carol, welcome to Yes We Canada.
Hello, Matt.
Now, I would imagine that after hosting one of CBC's most popular programs for 16 years, a publisher would have published any manuscript you put in front of them, like, an investigative Gothic novel / recipe book, self-help book, anything that you would have written, they would have published. Why did you pick this particular subject? Because it sounds like a gnarly one.
Well, I think besides the one you just mentioned, which I hadn't considered pitching, to do anything like a memoir or my favorite stories, it would have bored the snot out of me. And so there was no way I was going to do that. I was quite taken with what I had seen in the dying days, the last days that I had been at As It Happens, which was this shift in language. And it was really alarming for many reasons. Because it was so angry and so combative, but also because I had, in my previous experience as a journalist, traveling in the Balkans, covering wars in Bosnia or elsewhere, I'd seen what happens when language takes this turn, when it's starting to be used as something else to ignite people, to motivate them to do hateful things. We saw it in Rwanda. We saw it in Bosnia. We read about it in Germany in the 1930s, leading up to the wholly destructive war and the genocide that took place in Europe. And so these were alarming things. And now it seems though, well, okay, she obviously got onto something that we're all seeing. But at the time when I started writing this, which was 3 years ago, we only were getting hints that this was really taking this turn.
That when I bought the book in 2024, I remember I looked at it, I saw it in a bookshop in Toronto, I grabbed it right away, I said, I wonder what Carol's got to say. So I picked it up, I didn't even look inside, I just went, I'm buying this book. And this is the fall of 2024. We've got the election going on, and then the election loss of Kamala Harris, and the election of Trump, and I'm just like, at a loss for words. I'm not sure I have the bandwidth to handle that book right now. And I sat there and I just didn't crack it for like months, which is why you're doing an interview about your book over almost a year after it came out. But once I got inside it, I felt like it was autobiographical. You were a very personable storyteller in terms of your own experience.
Well, I guess it's easier to write a memoir if it's not just about you. And I only concluded elements of myself as a way of illustrating developments and how when you personally experience something and why it matters to you, it motivates you. One of the key things of writing nonfiction is the reader needs to know why you are writing this book. And so what you need to do, instead of just saying kind of once upon a time, these things happened, say you have to explain, why me? Why am I writing this book? I mean, there are many books being written about the phenomenon of what Trump was doing and what the breakdown of democracy and what I outlined in the book. But why am I writing it? And why am I writing this book? And why am I writing it this way? And the only way to do that is to give people an insight into me and my experiences and how I grew up and what mattered to me as a young person, what mattered, what values my parents gave me, what I learned living in this country of Canada, and how it came to be so important to me. And so without being able to add at least some autobiographical details, there would be no way for a reader to understand why it mattered so deeply to me to write this book.
I want to start with truth, because there are two words in the book. You count 6 words often, but I found 2 that really struck me, and one was my truth. Well, those are 2, actually. My truth. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because it seems to me like truth is the commodity we're missing the most of these days.
It was pretty easy for Donald Trump and those around him, this is in his first presidency, to turn the idea of truth on its ear in a very Orwellian style. And if you read George Orwell's 1984, sales of 1984 increased by 76,000% in the weeks after Donald Trump was first elected and first became president in 2017. People said, "Whoa, what is this thing? What is this up is down, in is out? Truth, that truths are lies and lies are truth." How did things get turned on their head? And so Orwell explains it well. But this idea of having your own truth, where truth is subjective, truth is whatever you think it is, where Trump's people were saying in 2017, well, we have alternate facts.
I did answer your question.
No, you did not. You did not answer the question of why the president asked the White House press secretary to come out in front of the podium for the first time and utter a falsehood. Why did he do that? It undermines the credibility of the entire White House press office on day one.
Don't be so overly dramatic about it, Chuck. You're saying it's a falsehood, and they're giving Sean Spicer, our press secretary, gave alternative facts to that. But the point remains.
Wait a minute. Alternative facts? Alternative facts, 4 of the 5 facts he uttered. The one thing he got right was Zeke Miller. 4 of the 5 facts he uttered were just not true. Look, alternative facts are not facts. They're falsehoods.
Which blew our minds as journalists. What are alternate facts? What the? But if you look back, this has been developing for some time on the left, in the academic world of universities, where they said, well, all truth is subjective. Everything, your truth is not my truth. My truth is not your truth. And so truth is whatever you want truth to be. So this was already developing as a kind of abstraction, and it was just picked up by the politicos who decided they could make hay with it.
When it comes to truth and Washington, I remember Senator Patrick Moynihan from New York said, you were entitled to your own opinion. You are not entitled to your own facts. That was one of the things that I always thought was the most powerful thing said about truth in Washington. And then I remember Karl Rove coming along and talking, who was working for Bush's White House, and he would talk about, no, that's the way we understand things, so those are our facts. But they weren't true. I mean, we saw that with weapons of mass destruction, right? So when you talk about how the MAGA crowd is ingesting truth, or what they think is truth from Trump, what are the origins of that?
I think that there are so many origins of it. I think, first of all, that Trump and the people around him are masters at manipulation, and they learned how to change words into having a different meaning. And the great masters of it were, of course, the Nazis, and they did it very early on. We often think of the Germans and what they did, the destructive war, Second World War, and the genocide of Jews. We think of that as being something with the 1940s. But very early on in the 1930s, the Germans began to seed language with this anti-Semitism, with these ideas. The German language is very malleable, and you can actually change words to include ideas like that. But that's how eventually people began to use the word Jew in all kinds of ways that were extremely derogatory. Everything was, if it was ugly or bad or awful, it was Jew this and Jew that. And so they prepared German people for the idea that these Jews, these dirty people, these awful people needed to be destroyed.
They're poisoning the blood of our country. That's what they've done. They poison mental institutions and prisons all over the world, not just in South America, not just the 3 or 4 countries that we think about, but all over the world. They're coming into our country from Africa, from Asia, all over the world. They're pouring into our country. Nobody's even looking at them. They just come in.
And so people were, by the time you get to the actual Holocaust, by the time you get to the final solution, they had programmed Germans to accept this as being something necessary. And so you see how language can be used in that way. And so when you saw in the election campaign against Kamala Harris, when you saw in the debate, when Donald Trump begins to talk about this vermin south of the border, when he talks about these illegal aliens, they're coming into your house, they'll slit your throat, they're eating people's pets in Springfield, Ohio.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in, they're eating the cats, they're eating the pets of the people that live there. And this is what's happening in our country.
When he starts using this language, and I recall people were kind of shocked, like he's gone right off the edge, but he hadn't. He knew what he was doing. And he's been feeding that language of othering people the way the Nazis did to the Jews. He's been othering immigrants with this extreme language. And eventually you have people, I have a friend who's a diehard Democrat, and I saw her in the summer, and I said, aren't you alarmed by what Trump is doing with immigrants? She said, oh, you mean the illegal aliens? I was gobsmacked. I said, what? How do you know they're illegal? What? She says, and I said, they're rounding them up and putting them in camp. She says, oh, you mean alligator Alcatraz? And she laughed. And so I realized that this really open-minded anti-Trump Democrat was now using the very language that a few years ago would have been appalling. And now to be able to demonize immigrants, to demonize other people, to use this kind of bigotry language is become so commonplace, people are comfortable with it. And it's happening in this country too. Increasingly, you hear the language of bigotry, xenophobia, racism, people becoming more and more comfortable with terms that even 5 years ago would have been unacceptable.
Now, you say in an interview that I saw you do that even Trump supporters don't believe that they're eating the cats and dogs in Springfield. So how do they get away with this stuff? Like, if his supporters themselves think, oh, he's just pulling another one out of his hat, like, how does that actually resonate with people?
Because it doesn't have to be something that happened. These are things that happen. This is the kinds of things they do. Even J.D. Vance said after the Springfield, Ohio thing, basically, well, it's not like we have evidence that anybody is making kebabs out of Rottweilers. I mean, we don't know that, but it does. It's the sort of things they do. We know this is the kind of people they are.
My constituents were the ones who talked about eating dog and cats, and I talked about it because you were ignoring this community. My constituents talked about it, and it is my responsibility to surface their concerns when the American media ignores it.
And so the way it's justified isn't like, well, I don't have evidence of anybody eating a Chihuahua, but I know that those kinds of people would eat your Chihuahua if they got their hands on it. I don't know anybody who's had their throat slit in their kitchen by an immigrant who came to pick fruit, and he actually just then was, because they're the most evil people in the world, as Trump says. These people are scum, as he keeps telling them. But I believe that they are capable of coming in and killing my wife and kids. And so it doesn't matter that the stuff didn't happen. It's the sort of stuff that happens. And so you're able to crowd, and this is exactly what the Nazis did, is that, you may not, the Jews, may be perfectly nice people, but that doesn't mean that these things about them are not true.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So you were writing the book in the spring of 2023, I guess, right? And through that whole cycle, there was an election campaign. When you were writing the book, Biden was running again, and Trump was the nominee presumptive, I would presume. I see in the book frequently you're very cautious about things because you don't know the future, and so many important things are happening right after the book came out. Was that a challenge for you?
It was worrisome because I thought I was going too far. In fact, I almost didn't go far enough. And I didn't. I was writing, I thought, a cautionary tale of what might happen, what could happen if we didn't keep a vigil, if we weren't paying attention to the language that's around us and how we're being manipulated with language. These are the horrible things that could happen. And in fact, all the horrible things that could happen that I wrote about happened and are happening now as in the present. The book, most of what I was writing began just after the January 7th insurrection in Washington, and at the same time as the so-called freedom convoy in Ottawa. And those were the things that actually inspired me the most, because that's when you could really see how language was being manipulated, how people were being manipulated with ideas that were simply not true, and how scary it was getting. In fact, violently scary. And so that was the backdrop of words like freedom, which is the freedom convoy. I thought had hijacked a word that they had nothing to do with much of what their movement represented, and how the idea that democracy was being destroyed by people in the January 6th insurrection, the whole idea of what democracy is, of having a free and fair election where somebody gets chosen by the people, and then you decide, no, we don't want that person, we're going to overthrow this election. These two events, extreme events that captured the world's attention, those were the two things that motivated the first two chapters of the book, which is freedom and democracy.
So at this time of year, everybody's thinking about how families get together at the holidays, because you've got Thanksgiving and Christmas coming up, and people can't really have conversations anymore, certainly pertaining to social events and political events. Do you have any counsel for how people can continue that kind of communication without falling into the kind of, yelling and screaming that one presumes, is attached to left and right politics these days?
I think that what happens in these holidays now isn't so much that there's yelling and screaming, it's that no one's allowed to talk about it. And so
it's like the elephant in the room,
right? It's like, we have made a very nice meal. We're going to really enjoy this meal, and we're not going to talk about politics. And so, because, grandma's coming and it really upsets her. But I think the opposite is actually true, which is, I think that what's happening is that young people are not allowed to have opinions or express opinions at school anymore because it's not kosher, it's not correct. They're not allowed to, they're afraid to express something that might stir something or say the wrong thing, because everything's either politically correct or forbidden in some other way. And they're not hearing discussions around the table. I grew up in a not terribly political home, but we had conversations about political things at home. We disagreed. We listened to that. I learned how to make an argument. I learned how to shape an idea and have it challenged by my family and then at school or whatever. Kids don't get that, and they're not getting it outside of the home. The only place for them now to hear people talk about ideas and test their ideas and agree to disagree is at home. And so it's really valuable for them to hear disagreement. It's really valuable for them to understand that if they have an opinion, someone might challenge that and it'll be tested, and they're going to have to come up with a pretty good argument in defense of it. And that's really valuable. So what alarms me about this shutting down of conversation is we have a whole generation of young people who don't learn how to express themselves or to have opinions, to challenge others, to develop their ideas in sophisticated ways, because they're not allowed to. No one's allowed to talk about anything anymore because it's going to end up in a fight.
The way politicians speak these days is so aggressive. It's lacking in politesse. There is absolutely... It's horrific in so many ways. They curse from the podium. You never heard that 5 years ago. You never heard people saying things like "fuck" from the podium, and it's a regular occurrence these days.
You know what? We basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the fuck they're doing. You understand that?
You know, Gavin Newsom just started doing this thing where his press office is emulating Trump in tweets.
Fighting fire with fire. I'm going to punch these sons of bitches in the mouth.
And we need to stand up to this authoritarian. We need to stand up at this moment.
If you've got issues with what I'm putting out, you sure as hell should have concerns about what he's putting out as president.
And I wondered what your thoughts were on that, because he's using the same language. And then I'm just wondering if kids are starting to think, well, that's the way, that is public discourse.
That's a danger of what Newsom is doing. And that you're talking about how he does everything in caps and he talks like it's Donald Trump talking.
And he talks about his hair and he talks about your favorite governor.
And this is the greatest this and the largest that. And it's all mocking Trump. The danger, one thing I learned As It Happens is that irony is a cultural thing, and that there are certain places that understand irony and places that don't. The United States is not an ironic place. Everything you say is, except for pockets of it, like maybe Chicago or New York and some cultures. But Canada is understands you get irony in Canada, less so in Alberta. I've always found that you can't being ironic when you're talking to someone from Alberta. It'll be you say well that's pretty stupid, isn't it? And they say, well, no, it's not. So I say, no, I meant that it really is smart.
Right,
and then you talk to a Newfoundlander, everything is ironic. It's so ironic that you miss half the. They'll say something, and then I'm the one saying, I'm just being ironic, and so. Different cultures have that, and I hope California shares Governor Newsom's irony. I'm not sure the whole country does, because they will, as you point out, pick up saying, "Oh, I guess that's how you talk about things now."
I have a theory that this is not going to end at the ballot box. This is going to end at the mailbox, and what I mean by that is that Trump supporters are going to go to their mailbox and they're going to find out that they've been cut off from Medicare because, grandma isn't working or whatever the reason is. And it's going to hit home, and suddenly they're going to realize this has not been good for me. What is your take on the outcome of this situation? And I should say that today we're speaking on a day when Trump has threatened to send military troops into Chicago and has told the citizens of Chicago that he has renamed the Department of Defense, and it's now called the Department of War, and that's for a reason. That was a quote from his True Social last night. So I'm just wondering, where does this evolve to, in your view?
I'm less and less interested in what Trump is doing, and so are Canadians. I mean, there's a poll just recently that something like 83% of Canadians don't want to hear about Trump anymore, because we just
that's not surprising.
We know he's awful, and we know. I mean, the United States is on a death spiral. It's just I don't think you can help it at this point.
So you've written it off. You've written it off.
What I get asked a lot as I was crossing the country. People would ask me the question, "What makes you hopeful?" And at first I was stumped because I said, really, nothing makes me hopeful. But then I realized that when people ask me what makes me hopeful, what's hopeful, it was a question. It was nostalgia. They were nostalgic for something that is in the past. People wanted me to say that eventually we're going to wake up and it's all going to be over. It was just a bad dream and Donald Trump is gone and everything goes back the way it was. I don't want things to go back to the way they were. I think we have an opportunity to really reinvent something. And so I have actually, for the paperback edition, which is just coming out this month, I've written another chapter, and that is chapters, and it's actually just an extra, but it's called Afterwards. And the two afterwards are hopeful and meaningful, in which I say in this chapter that this idea of being hopeful is a passive idea. It's an idea that doesn't interest me, being hopeful. What interests me is the other word, meaningful. And so I look for things which are meaningful gestures. How do we have meaning and purpose in our lives? How do we take on the project of reinventing Canada without this connection with the United States, or with a much diminished connection with it? How do we reinvent ourselves in a meaningful way? What is my purpose in this project? What is my role in this new development, in this next chapter of a country that I have become deeply attached to in a way that I haven't felt in a very long time. And so what I'm saying is that forget hopefulness. Hopeful is some kind of a desire for things to turn out okay, meaningful. Look for things that are meaningful, that donate your energies to the causes of the epoch in which we now live, and try and find some purpose, some role for yourself in recreating this. And I think that so I'm feeling extremely positive, though not hopeful. I am more sort of confident about Canada than I've ever been before.
I'm talking to you, somebody who's done 25,000 interviews and who spent 16 years on the air. And so your perspective is going to be extremely different than other people. You've absorbed an awful lot of content. That idea of not a lot of hope at this particular point, but I mean, I'm just trying to process, what does that actually mean?
It means that the idea of just being hopeful, I regard as being a passive approach, a desire that things are just going to work out okay, and they're not going to. I mean, climate change is a reality. These are real challenges. The tariff war, the trade war we have with the United States is having with the world, is not going to end well. None of these things is going to end well, and so I'm not hopeful that these things are going to turn out okay. I do believe in humans. I do believe in our ability to adapt and to find ways to make things work. And I have a tremendous amount of faith in this country, in Canada. But my idea of hopefulness is that, as I say, it's a nostalgic idea. It's a nostalgia to have things just go back to the way they were. And I'm not talking about a religious hopefulness where you have hope in God or the ability to grace or something like that. I'm talking about the idea of just sitting back there and waiting for things to turn out okay. And what I'm saying is that you have to get up up on your hind legs and roar and start to get things done and start to find. And I think that there's no gesture that's too small to be meaningful. You don't have to run for public office, but just being kind to your neighbors, taking care of each other, looking out for others, being responsible as a citizen, being engaged, joining things, taking part in the Canadian society and helping the direction it's going in, caring about about each other, your family, your neighbors. All these things are meaningful gestures. I don't know if they're hopeful gestures because it doesn't interest me. I'm looking for my purpose in all of this, and my purpose may not engage in some kind of optimistic, everything's going to turn out all right, Jack.
But I guess what you're calling for is activism on some level, right?
I don't even think activism. I think that it could be. It could be an activist, but I think that I think having purpose in one's life is not necessarily activism. I think it's a matter of saying that this world in which we live and my society matters to me a lot. My community matters to me a lot. And I'm going to be there for it. I'm going to engage in it. Because I think we're social animals. And we are social animals. Our exoskeleton is society. We make societies in order to survive. We can't survive without societies. That's the animals that we are. We are social beings. And so there's what I worry about, I wrote about in this book, was this tendency of people to withdraw into some kind of individualism, some kind of selfishness, where it's just about me. It's just about getting what I need. It's about not caring about others, not getting vaccinated or wearing a mask, or it's not voting, or whatever it is that you withdraw from because you're not going to be bothered with that stuff anymore. Well, these are dangerous tendencies, and to not see your role as being part of the society, it's not necessarily activism. It's a matter of having purpose in your life.
One of the things you said in the book that really resonated with me is when you first started covering politics, someone told you liberals are people who want things to get better. Conservatives are people who don't want things to get any worse. And what I'm seeing with a lot of my folks in the States and my friends and stuff is that they, obviously, the Democrats, the lefties, they all hate the policies that are being put in place at the moment. But what really frightens them more than anything else is that 77 million people voted for this, and that they've lost faith in their own countrymen. I know you're talking about Canada when you talk about meaningful hope and those things, but what would you say to the American audience? Because we have a large American audience as well.
Well, we know that there are large numbers of Americans who subscribe to even the most extreme ideas of MAGA, which is that they want to see a nation built that is patriarchal, Christian, presumably for many of them a white society, that they want those values to be that somehow they call it restored. I'm not sure it was ever like that in the U.S. But a large numbers of Americans just didn't feel they had any other political home but the Republicans, and Donald Trump represented something for them. We'll see how because we're seeing his poll numbers dive right now. If you look into Canada and the United States, because if it wasn't for Donald Trump's tariffs, quite likely the Conservatives, Pierre Poilievre, would be the Prime Minister today. I think what I saw the most in Canada and I hear in the United States is that large numbers of people no longer feel they have a political home. The liberals seem to be elite, and this happens to liberalism quite frequently. It gets into this kind of highfalutin area that even Canadians who are they believe to be kind of naturally liberal by temperament, even Canadians have a hard time with it, and certainly Americans do. But I think that large numbers of people don't see any conservatism that represents them either, because conservatism is co-opted by populism, and starting with in Canada with Stephen Harper, and maybe in the United States, you're stuck with Trump because you want to be a conservative and you don't feel you have any other home. I think for a large number of young people, there's a real frustration that nobody sees them. And that's what I heard a lot as I was traveling or talking to people about this book, a feeling that they're not, young people don't feel that they're seen, that anybody sees them in the way that they saw me when I was a young person, because I was in the middle of the baby boom. And we were the largest demographic in the history of North America. But young people today don't feel seen and heard. And I'm talking about people sort of under 40. I think that you're seeing a large number of them tending toward, maybe we'll give this guy a go because what else is there? I think more than anything, there just wasn't a political home for so many people who did not subscribe to what the Democrats represented or what the liberals represent in this country. And so they cast about for something else. And this is the best they've been able to do.
Listen, we have a few seconds left, and I just wanted to thank you very much for doing this, and also wanted to ask you, do you know how far you are from Reading at the moment?
It feels like it's as far away as Oz right now, to tell you the truth.
Thanks for doing this, Carol.
All right, Matt.
Okay, so the reference to Reading is a long-standing inside joke from the radio show that Carol used to host, As It Happens. The joke started in 1970 when a producer noted a location in the UK was, quote, several miles from Reading, as a way to orient Canadian listeners. But since most listeners had no idea where Reading was, it became kind of a running gag. For the record, Carol was in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, for our interview, and Toronto is 5,765 kilometers from Reading, UK. Carol Off's book, At a Loss for Words, A Conversation in an Age of Rage, is out in paperback this month, September 2025. I highly recommend it because anyone who has interviewed 25,000 people in 16 years has accumulated some pretty deep knowledge about the human condition. And frankly, we all need a little bit of that right about now. Well, that's a wrap on Season 4. We want to thank you all so much for listening and supporting the show. It means a lot to us. I want to thank our announcer, Lisa Evans, our sound designer and mix engineer, Pi Salen Cutler, our permanent guest host, Mio Edelman, Doug Wild, and Manteca for the theme. Season 5 starts in January 2026. Once again, Thank you all for your support. We're so grateful. Until next time.